In the late summer of 1854, in the Soho district of London, people began to die. Not slowly, not over weeks. A person could be perfectly healthy at breakfast, struck down by violent illness by midday, and dead before the sun rose again. In the space of just 10 days, more than 500 people in a single small neighborhood were killed. The final toll of the outbreak would exceed 600 lives. The disease was cholera, and in that era, it was one of the most terrifying killers on Earth. Nobody knew what caused it. Nobody knew how it spread. The greatest medical minds of the age were certain of only one thing, and they were completely, catastrophically wrong. One man saw through it. A quiet, methodical London doctor who refused to accept the accepted wisdom, and who hunted this invisible killer through the streets of Soho, with nothing but a map, a list of the dead, and a relentless, brilliant mind. This is Dark Diagnosis Files, and this is the story of Jon Snow and the Broad Street Pump. Everything you're about to hear is drawn from documented history, from Jon Snow's own published records, from his famous map, and from the corroborating investigation of a local clergyman. This is the story, recorded in detail, of one of the most important pieces of medical detective work ever performed. First, you have to understand cholera and why it inspired such dread. Cholera is a disease of catastrophic, violent dehydration. Once infected, a victim suffers uncontrollable diarrhea and vomiting so severe that the body can lose enormous quantities of fluid in a matter of hours. The effects are horrifying and rapid. The skin turns bluish-grey, the eyes sink into the face, the body shrivels as it dries out from within. Death can come within a single day, sometimes within hours, from sheer fluid loss. In the 19th century, cholera swept across the world in great pandemic waves, killing tens of thousands in Britain alone. And through all of it, the medical establishment clung to a single, confident explanation for how it spread. They called it miasma theory. The disease had first reached Britain in the early 1830s, and it returned again and again over the following decades, each wave leaving thousands dead. London, in particular, was catastrophically vulnerable. The city had swollen enormously in population, but its infrastructure had not kept pace. Human waste was collected in hundreds of thousands of cesspools beneath and beside homes, and much of it eventually made its way into the River Thames, the very river from which several private water companies drew the drinking water they piped to Londoners. The city was, in effect, drinking its own sewage without understanding the danger. It was a perfect engine for waterborne disease. Miasma theory held that diseases like cholera were caused by bad air, by foul-smelling vapours rising from rotting waste, sewage, and filth. In the crowded, stinking cities of Victorian Britain, this seemed to make intuitive sense. The poor districts smelled terrible, and the poor districts had the most disease. Therefore, people reasoned, the smell itself, the corrupted air, must be the cause. Breathe the bad air, catch the disease. It was wrong, but it was believed by nearly everyone. And then there was Jon Snow. Snow was a London physician, a genuinely brilliant one, who had already made his name as a pioneer of anaesthesia, personally administering chloroform to Queen Victoria during childbirth. But Snow was deeply skeptical of miasma theory. It simply didn't match what he observed. If cholera were caused by breathing bad air, why did it so often strike the gut first, and so violently, rather than the lungs? Snow had developed a radical alternative theory, that cholera was not breathed in at all. It was swallowed. He believed it spread through contaminated water, that some invisible agent in water fouled by human waste was carrying the disease. Snow had actually been building this case for years. During an earlier outbreak, he had noticed that districts supplied by different water companies had strikingly different death rates. One drew from a polluted stretch, another from cleaner water. The neighborhoods served by the contaminated supply died in far greater numbers, even when they were otherwise similar in every way. It was, in effect, a vast natural experiment. But his findings had made little impression on a profession certain it already knew the answer. When the Broad Street outbreak exploded in late August 1854, it was, for Snow, a terrible opportunity. If he could prove where it was coming from, he might finally demonstrate that his water theory was correct. So Jon Snow did something that today seems obvious, but at the time was genuinely innovative. He turned himself into a detective. He got the official records of the dead, and then he walked the streets of Soho, going house to house. As Snow gathered his data, he created a map. On a map of the Soho neighborhood, Snow marked every single cholera death as a small black bar stacked at the address where it occurred. And as the marks accumulated, a pattern emerged from the chaos. The deaths were not spread evenly across the district. They were densely, overwhelmingly clustered around one single point, a public water pump on Broad Street. The closer a home was to the pump, the more deaths it suffered. But Snow was a careful scientist, and a cluster alone wasn't proof. So he examined the exceptions, and the exceptions turned out to be the most powerful evidence of all. A workhouse in the middle of the outbreak zone suffered very few casualties. Why? Snow discovered it had its own private well. The residents didn't drink from the Broad Street pump. There was a brewery nearby whose workers were strikingly untouched. They largely drank the beer they produced and had their own water supply. And then there were the deaths far away from Broad Street. One woman lived at a distance but preferred the taste of that pump's water and had it delivered. She drank it, and it killed her. Every exception confirmed the theory. On the 7th of September, 1854, John Snow took his evidence to the local parish authorities. He made a simple, urgent request: remove the handle from the Broad Street pump, make it impossible for anyone to draw water from it. The authorities were skeptical, but agreed to try it. The next day, the handle of the Broad Street pump was removed, and the outbreak, already declining, came to an end. Now, there's an important nuance. The outbreak was already subsiding as many had fled. Snow never claimed the pump handle single-handedly stopped it, but its removal became something far more important, a symbol of the first epidemiological detective work. There was still the question of contamination, and the answer, uncovered by Henry Whitehead, who initially set out to disprove Snow, was heartbreakingly simple. Whitehead's role is a lesson in intellectual honesty. He became Snow's strongest ally. Investigators traced it back to a single baby who had contracted cholera. The child's mother had washed the baby's soiled diapers and emptied the dirty water into a cesspool right in front of the house. And that cesspool was located just a few feet from the well that fed the Broad Street pump. Its lining had decayed. Waste from the cesspool was seeping directly into the drinking water. One sick child, one contaminated cesspool, one leaking well. Here is the bittersweet truth. John Snow was right. And yet, in his lifetime, he did not win. The establishment rejected his conclusions. Snow died just a few years later, in 1858, without ever seeing his water theory fully accepted. It was only later, with Pasteur and Koch, who identified Vibrio cholerae, that germ theory triumphed. Snow had been right all along, years ahead of the science that could finally explain why. Today, John Snow is celebrated as one of the founding fathers of epidemiology. That map is one of the most famous documents in medical history. The method he pioneered is the exact same method used to fight every outbreak and pandemic today. If real medical detective stories like this one grip you, please subscribe to Dark Diagnosis Files. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday and Friday. Real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. The killer was in the water.